Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson, a World Alternative Media here, and of course we're joined by author and economic analyst here. I'm John Sneisen, and we talked not too long ago about how Canadian household debt had reached $1.8 trillion, about $22,000 plus for each Canadian. Absolutely insane. And we've talked about how the Bank for International Settlements had recently warned that Canada is one of three economies in the world most at risk of a banking crisis, alongside Hong Kong and China as a whole. But I mean, this just continues to get worse because people are taxed to death, people are regulated to death, we see this vast amount of central planning by the central bank, the Bank of Canada. And this post is quite interesting from the Financial Post. It says, more than 40% of Canadians feeling pinch of rising interest rates, up 5 percentage points. Now, I just want to make it as clear as possible before we go further into the article that the title is a little bit confusing. So when they say up 5 percentage points, they don't mean that the interest rates are up 5 percentage points. They mean that it's the 40% of Canadians feeling the pinch of rising interest rates is up 5 percentage points. I guess it would have been from 30 something. It goes into it, I think 43% of Canadians in the article. But going into the article itself, a new poll suggests a growing proportion of Canadians say they are feeling the effects of higher interest rates. The quarterly MNP Consumer Debt Index survey says 43% of Canadians say they're feeling the effects of higher interest rates, up 5 percentage points from 3 months ago. So I guess what they're saying is up from 38%. That should be made a bit more clear. Financial Post, you might want to put an eye on that, keep an eye on that. But anyway, says the poll done for insolvency firm MNP also said 51% of respondents fear rising interest rates could impact their ability to repay their debts, while 33% agreed that rising interest rates could possibly push them towards bankruptcy. And they have the chart here that's quite interesting that chronicles that. And it also says 47% said they do not believe they'll be able to cover all living and family expenses in the next 12 months without going into further debt. And this just keeps getting worse and worse. I mean, all the banks are insolvent. People are rushing into getting mortgages and loans and all this kind of crazy stuff that ends up in a lot of bad effects, after effects long term. If you consider the fact that everything's bubbling up, the Toronto market, housing market is going down. We could go into a billion different things, John, that is affecting people in Canada right now. But can you go into what this Financial Post article talks about?
Yeah, well, we have before and, written a book about it. So, you tell us about talking about how bad it's become here in Canada. Now, of course, we talked about this 2-3 years ago, Josh, and now you're seeing the ramifications of this cheap money and all these debt binging that Canada has been on. Now, I wanted to just run some numbers by some people and see what they think about the numbers. And because we recently did a report on Canada's, they call it market debt, which is like the government's market debt is $1 trillion, not 700 something, which is supposed to be. Well, that's actually $1 trillion is the debt then. It's not talk about lying to the populace. Market debt is different. Think about it as having a credit line or a mortgage. It's well, that's debt. That's debt. So it's just insane. But if you had that $1 trillion and currently we have 1.25% the central bank rate here, Bank of Canada has, and that would give us an interest, just a simple interest. We're not talking about compounding interest at all. A simple interest of $12.5 billion annually to pay to the bankers. And then, of course, if interest rates were to jump to, let's say, 5%, Josh, well, now we're looking at $50 billion. And that's an increase of $37.5 billion. That it could have huge ramifications on the bankruptcy, of course, of the government and a lot of other provinces. We've been talking about our province here in Manitoba. We've been talking about New Brunswick, Newfoundland, Labrador, all these different provinces that are really struggling. And then on top, you have the $1.8 trillion in debt, in consumer debt. On top of that, from
Alberta is a net payer into the system. They have huge issues as well. And I just wanted to quickly mention, John, because it's interesting that Canada only pays the interest on the debt, which is not the sign of someone that wants to pay off the debt. It's just paying the interest, and they're using our taxpayer money to do so. A lot of it.
That's why they're paying interest.
Well, absolutely. And then you mentioned that we've been talking about this for a few years. And interestingly, going back a couple of years when we were talking about this situation, people said, well, why hasn't it happened yet? Why hasn't it happened yet? Because it doesn't mean that it's going to happen tomorrow. The fundamentals are off the table due to the level of manipulation, centralization, etc. in the monetary system as well as in the markets. You can't put a date on it. You just know it's going to happen. And this is something that was due to play out over time. And we are watching it play out right now. And it's really starting to cause a huge effect on the populace. And this has nothing to do with Harper or Trudeau. I mean, they both have an effect on it overall, but it comes down to the central planners, which are a global complex, a cartel. Yeah, so, I mean, yeah, Trudeau's an idiot, an absolute fool, a moron. I don't think he could tie his own shoes in the morning. I'm pretty sure he has someone for that he probably pays a few $100 million of taxpayer money for.
That's who's showing his socks to.
Yeah, exactly. Wow, Mr. Trudeau, very nice socks. But the point is, do you honestly think that he has the ability to even centrally plan anything? The guy's an idiot. It comes down to these people in the quote-unquote deep state, which is really the central banking system, the global complex, the cartel worldwide, and of course the regulators and the bureaucrats and the government behind him.
Yeah, everybody that's been employed in the government for 30, 40 years. That's who is the shadow government. The deep state, if you can call it. It's not like just holdovers that believes in one thing. They believe in government, and that's what they want. It doesn't matter if it was like talking about the United States quickly, talk about the deep state. Well, the deep state is everybody that is employed by the government. I keep hearing on the news, well, it's Obama holdovers. Well, that could be part of it, but it's a bit deeper than that. Well, it's called the deep state for a reason. Yeah, exactly. And everybody, been there maybe for 20, 30, 40 years. Well, were they, who was at the time, Josh? I don't know. Like holdovers. Like, come on, that's just BS, most of it. And, we got to start talking about this mass amounts of debt that are racking up, and especially the populace here in Canada is one of the most indebted populace in the world. We have, I think we're number 4 or 5 right now in the world, and it's getting really bad. People, and as you can see, so many more people are now starting to just feel the heat, and that's just from a 0.75% interest rate hike. Yeah. That is nothing at all. Yeah. Like when I do my finances, I calculate in if I had to pay 10-15% at least. Just make sure that I have enough. If something happens, you got to prepare yourself. And so many people just got into debt without thinking about that whatsoever. And you've seen that in a lot of countries. Look at Iceland. I just recently talked to BBC Radio about Iceland and what happened over there. In 2008, 2009, they had 18% interest rate, Josh, over in Iceland. And that was from a massive bubble, debt bubble, which this is, of course, everybody says it's the bankers. Well, everybody got into debt in Iceland and is still struggling. But yeah, it all comes to this massive debt mountain that we created. And I don't think we can get out of it whatsoever without something really hurting. And that's going to be, bankruptcies, as people are afraid of, and debt collapses. Well, yeah.
The inevitable has to happen, and the sooner the better. The longer we put it off, the worse it's going to be. That's why, this constant obsession with solving these problems, quote unquote, by centralizing that which was created by centralization in the first place, the problems, it's just really insane. It's a definition of insanity, really, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. You're just blowing up the bubble bigger, so it pops bigger and more comes collapsing down on the people, and, the people that are holding this thing up, and it just keeps getting heavier, and eventually they get crushed underneath. But the sooner the better. The sooner it happens, the more we can actually rebuild from scratch at a free monetary, free market level. John, do you have a bottom line for this report?
Well, were you saying that Keynesian economics is insanity, Josh?
Yes.
Yeah. No, bottom line is we're racking up so much debt, and we don't understand that we're getting really strangled by, first, like there's a couple of things that strangles us is, of course, the creation of new money, which is all these new debt that comes into circulation. That's new money. So things get more expensive. That's why you've seen the big bubbles in Toronto and Vancouver. Then secondly, of course, is the taxation and the fees that are just slowly accumulating on us, which which are forcing us into debt. You see that in most of the big socialist countries that have heavy taxation. Well, they also have heavy private debt. A lot of the populace are in a lot of debt because they want to afford things that they could before, but they have to get into a lot of debt. So that's where we're heading towards. People need to protect themselves by having, we talked about precious metals and all this, but also you need to try to deleverage yourself as much as you can, because in a crisis like this, people say, well, we're going to have a debt jubilee. It's going to be all fine. I don't think we're going to have a debt jubilee for the populace. We might have a debt jubilee for some corporations, the
banks.
Corporations, the banks and the government, but I don't think we're going to see a proper jubilee of the populace, because who is the bad? Like, if you had a jubilee, well, that means that all money will cease to exist. The Canadian dollar would cease to exist because money is debt and debt is money. And if you remove, if you're gonna have a debt jubilee, you would basically just be left with the tiny little bit amount of cash that's in circulation.
Yeah, absolutely. A populace in debt is a populace in servitude. And if they shove you down that bottomless pit of debt, you are forced to ask for a ladder up from the government and the banking system, which puts you in perfect servitude. All fiat currencies eventually revert to their true value of zero. They always have, they always will, going back to 1024 AD in China. We've talked about this many times here at WHAM, and we will keep talking about it because people need to understand how important it is to decentralize, to be responsible, self-sustainable, financially responsible. The hallmark of freedom itself is responsibility, after all, which comes down to you individuals, as individuals, educating yourself and being the change you wish to see, instead of depending on these almighty powers that depend on your dependence and push you into servitude by the belief in them in the first place, by the faith in them in the first place. People have to break free from this and rule themselves and be able to take care of themselves and not depend on others. So thanks for going into this with us, John. And until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson and John Sneisen signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change. Like what you see here at WHAM? Don't forget to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon. We can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated, especially as we are so overwhelmingly demonetized and censored by YouTube, as the ADL comes in and flags all of our content as hate speech. Also, check our Bitcoin address in the description as well as on the screen for you to scan if you please. And also find us at steemit.com at Josh Sigurdson, the future of social media, where you get paid in the upvote of your post in Steem, the cryptocurrency. And also find us at the Red Pill Expo, which we have a reference link for below in the description and the comments as well. Hosted by G. Edward Griffin, amazing speakers coming out to speak this year. Don't miss it. It's in Spokane, Washington, June 21st to 23rd. We hope to see you there. But until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.